technology doesn't just exist, right? There's no naturally flowing river of technology where you scoop out a bucket of algorithms and like magic. We just have everything. These algorithms are created by people. What is prioritized, what is deprioritized is all created by people. Data is created and captured in a variety of different ways, but what it looks like, who's included, who's not included, those decisions are also by people. And another reality is that we're all biased in some way. And so the systems that we make will be biased in some ways.
Welcome to System Catalyst, the show that cracks the code on making the world a better place. I'm your host, English Saul. Today, I'm talking to Afua Bruce, an expert on how technology affects people and communities. She is the author of The Tech That Comes Next and the principal of ANB Advisory Group, where she helps organizations across sectors build and fund technology responsibly. Before starting her firm, Afua held leadership roles at the White House, the FBI, IBM, and New America. With a background in software engineering, data science, AI, and real experience working alongside communities, Afua brings an equity-first lens to her work. In this episode, we're talking about tech, AI, and how they can transform the philanthropic system. Afua, welcome. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I've been looking forward to this interview for the last couple of weeks now that we've kind of come back from break. And so I have a lot of really fun questions for you today. But I'm going to start off with just hopefully a little bit of a softball. Can you tell me what is the number one app that you use on your phone?
The number one app I use, it is definitely one of my texting apps. I don't know which one would rise to the top, since different people have different preferences, but it's a texting app.
Yeah, like that makes sense, right? Because that's how we communicate now, is via text. Are you one of those people? I feel like I'm one of those people where I'm so comfortable communicating via text. When someone calls me, I'm like, oh no, what's going on? Like, usually my calls are like scheduled. And then if somebody just calls me out of the blue, I'm like, I get paralyzed. I don't really know what to do.
I'm the opposite, actually.
Nice.
I love a phone call. I love to randomly call people. The reality of people's lives and schedules and different time zones means sometimes a text at their 2 a.m. is more appropriate than a random call. But I love a phone call. It's
nice.
What I prefer. Yeah.
So, Afua, can you tell me a little bit about the work that you do right now today? What is it that you're working on?
Absolutely. I work with mission-driven organizations on tech and data strategy. And so that can take a variety of different forms. I have partnered with organizations, both for-profit companies and foundations, on creating investment portfolio or grant portfolios, helping to come up with everything from what should this grant challenge or what should this fund be dedicated towards? How do we figure out what an application and review process looks like? And then how do they ultimately select and distribute the funding? I work directly with mission-driven organizations, everything from museums, nonprofits, or small and medium-sized companies on tech strategy. So what are they using today? What would they like to be using? Who should be in that organization? What roles they should have? And how can they get there? These days, a lot of people have questions about AI. So a lot of the work touches on that. But I always like to remind people that AI is one of many technologies available. So that my work is more expansive than just AI.
Absolutely. And I think that's we live in a world where AI has been used almost as this catch-all for technology. And I can imagine a lot of the folks that you work with would maybe say, hey, AI, we're in the midst of an AI revolution. AI is going to take over everything. And, we're living in the age of AI. What is kind of your response to that, especially as we're sort of talking about kind of the overarching way technology can be an additive thing, especially to the grants or the communities that you're aiming to serve?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would agree that we are living in the age of AI. I'd argue that AI has become a greater and greater percentage of what technology is over the past decade as well. But certainly with generative AI and tools such as ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini and others that have an easy to use interface, the generative AI is more accessible to the general public. So I would say that that is the reality. We are in this age of AI. I would also say, though, that what the age of AI looks like is not inevitable. And so the extent to which generative AI especially is used and where it's adopted and how it's adopted is, I think, very much up for debate. We've seen over the past year a lot of organizations try to adopt generative AI in order to, maximize efficiency and all of that, only to roll back some of their AI commitments. We've seen other organizations really, though, take advantage of generative AI to help with research and development of new tools and new materials, new medicines, and others. So I think the future of AI is very much up to us still, but it is certainly changing the way that people interact with technology. It's changing the way people interact with each other, and it's changing the way people do their jobs.
Absolutely. Can you, just for our listeners, can you help break down that term of generative AI and what we really mean when we kind of add that kind of wording generative to the term AI? Can you help us understand that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So generative AI is AI that is there to generate new content. And so it does that through a variety of statistical computations and sort of a very mathematical process that way. For something that is built off of large language models, such as a ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini, any of those tools, there's a lot of information. And so what it generates often seems really accurate and often is pretty accurate. But because it is sort of what is statistically the next best choice that is being generated for you, sometimes it will be wrong. Hallucinations are just a design reality of how generative AI works. That doesn't mean there is no use case for generative AI, or that I don't think you should completely stay away from it, but understand that there will be times when it is good, and understand that even as you adopt generative AI tools, you need to not cede all of your thinking to the tools and to the algorithms.
I think that's a really excellent point, and it's a good just sort of caution around, like, there's still an element for human decision making and deciphering when it comes to using these tools. And I had a friend once kind of use a metaphor of a self-driving car as it kind of relates to AI and generative AI, where it's like, for the normal circumstances, a self-driving car actually works pretty well, and it can stay in the lanes and it can get you from point A to point B. But it's these outlying circumstances where we haven't quite figured out, like, the ability for a self-driving car to react in real time if you're in the middle of a snowstorm and there's, ice on the road, and also the light is shining here. It's these kind of outlying circumstances where you can't necessarily rely on the response and reflexes of a self-driving car. And I think it's kind of a similar situation for generative AI, where it's like, within the bounds of a normal question, like I'm asking for a recipe or I'm asking for a fact about World War II, it gives me the information and it's usually correct. And then you start sort of getting into more complex or nuanced questions or information where you really start to still need that human kind of editorial eye on the information. Is that something, how do you think about that, especially as it comes into play with your focus being on serving a lot of the kind of communities, and how might kind of the information or the ways in which you use generative AI or the people you work with use generative AI as it relates to kind of, the funding and the services and everything you're trying to do to impact a community?
Yeah, absolutely. So There's so much in there. So let me figure out where I want to start. I think one of the things that you touched on, though, that I think is really important when we talk about generative AI is this idea of what's normal functioning, right? In your example of self-driving cars, I spent some time over the holidays in Arizona. The roads are wide, the sun is shining, the roads are smooth. Lots of self-driving cars are tested there. And so they work pretty well on those roads. Last year, I also spent time in Ghana, where the roads are different qualities. People do not, our cars drive a lot more closely. We a lot more in and out. I didn't feel less safe on those roads. I don't think I personally saw any more accidents there than I see when I'm in the US. But I would not trust a self-driving car in that environment because the rules of engagement are so different. And so I think that's true when we talk about use of these widely available generative AI tools, especially, is understanding sort of the environment in which they were created and in the environments in which they are effective. Also, we've talked about this reality that the AI tools, I think, are most effective to people who know what they're talking about, right? I have used generative AI tools to help with brainstorming in writing papers for myself, for example, or writing articles or just generating content that I need to write. And sometimes, even when I give it a really detailed prompt, I tell it that it's me and have this history with this tool, I'll sometimes read what it generates and say, wow, that's a really interesting fact. I didn't know about that in my space. That sounds great. Let me just see if I can find it. Hey, Claude, can you tell me what the source was for this fact that you include? And Claude responds back, I made it up. It seemed like it would be good. Thank you for telling me. But if I didn't know enough about the subject matter to know that seemed a little off or just seemed really surprising, I wouldn't know to further engage with that. Because I did, using the tools helped me speed up what I was trying to write. But that did require me to know what I was talking about. If I hadn't, and we've seen multiple examples of this over the past year of people using generative AI to generate long documents and citations, and those being incorrect, and them having to publicly walk back the final output, in some cases having to return thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to their client for having inaccurate materials. And so it is important to recognize it's a tool, that AI can be a tool, again, to help generate the content that you need. But at the same time, you're still responsible. You as a human are still responsible for the quality control. You're still responsible for having integrity in your process, and your name is the one on the document or on the marketing material that you've created, on that email. And so you will be held responsible and accountable for what you put out, regardless of how you created it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, especially as we are interacting, especially, if we talk about the world of impact and systems change and philanthropy, there's still ownership. There's still we have to show up and own what we put out there and own what we say and own, the things that we articulate into the space. How do you think AI and other technology can improve the philanthropic sector?
Yeah, so even though I've given you all of these cautions about how to use AI and all of the ways that it can fail, I am someone who continues to use it and continues to believe that Gen AI has positive applications. I think a lot of people are using it, or not a lot of people, but I think we see several examples of when it should not have been used. But there are positive applications for AI broadly and for generative AI. Over the past year, I've seen organizations use it to help speed up the review of incredibly manual matching processes. So the mentoring type programs, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Seattle did a project like this, I think last year, maybe the year before, since it's now 2026, but working on that to help speed up their matching process and take something that was several months and greatly reduce it down to something that can be done in a couple of weeks. I've seen people use different AI tools to help analyze academic data and help identify people and students who are at risk of dropping out. So you can keep more students in school who can get their degrees and can gain gainful employment and can change the trajectory of their lives and their families' lives. We've also seen AI tools being used in some cases really well to help support teachers and learners in the classroom to create tailored and safe learning environments to help reinforce different techniques and different lessons that have been taught by the teachers, and making sure that the students get the custom attention that they need, again, in support with both teachers and learners. So there are a variety of ways to use Gen AI effectively, and I'm really excited to see mission-driven organizations really take advantage of that and to create more use cases and to figure out what the sort of testing and customization process looks like to do that well. I'll just give you one more example. I know I've been talking for a bit, but working with quill.org over the past year and a half was an experience that was really fun for me, because quill.org said, we want to be able to use Gen AI. We know there's some problems with the large language models as is. So they created their own data set and used that as the basis. And so now they have a tool that is really informed by educators, because that's their training set, that's their training data. And they've put in a lot of controls to ensure that the tools respond in safe and respective ways of the learners.
I love that example so much. And it makes me think a little bit too about your book, The Tech That Comes Next.
Yes.
And, one of the premises of your book is that technology is made by humans and it can't be neutral. And so can you talk a little bit about kind of even some examples, just like the one you just told me of, like, how does the human put their biases in this training data, and how can maybe we do better at centering or even creating just better training data so that it isn't so biased? Like, is that even possible? But yeah, can you just talk a little bit about kind of that premise in your book a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. In the Tech That Comes Next, we talk a lot about the reality that technology doesn't just exist, right? There's no naturally flowing river of technology where you scoop out a bucket of algorithms and like magic. We just have everything. These algorithms are created by people. What is prioritized, what is deprioritized is all created by people. Data is created and captured in a variety of different ways, but what it looks like, who's included, who's not included, those decisions are also by people. And another reality is that we're all biased in some way. And so the systems that we make will be biased in some way. So when we talk about ways to reduce bias, it's several different things, right? We can look at the data sets themselves. And so you can say, these large language model tools that I might have access to are trained on the internet broadly, which has a lot of stuff on it I may or may not want to include. But if you're working with a particular population, you can also look at what your own organization has as to what case notes maybe you have with a different population, and what your interactions have been, what your CRM system has, and how you can marry that with a large language model to then round out the data to make sure that it is including the people to whom you are interacting with or want to interact with an AI tool. Again, if you determine that a generative AI tool is the right choice for that particular use case that you're dealing with. I think also recognizing that some of the example that I gave of creating your own training data is a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money. And so that may be the ideal. And so would love, for any funders listening to be funding support of creating training data that is relevant and ethical, and people consent to sharing and all of that wonderful stuff. But short of that, really being critical as to when you do and don't use these tools, what the right use cases are, and again, what additional information you can add to the tools to help round out and sort of make your own customized language model.
Mm. And how is limiting bias the same or part of infusing equity into AI? Tell me about kind of what we mean by infusing equity into AI.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say part of limiting bias is part of infusing equity. But I would argue more broadly that, and we talk about this certainly in the tech that we being Amy Afua Bruce, my co-author, and I talk about this a lot in the tech that comes next, is that technology should work for people. It should work for everyone who is interacting with these technology systems. And so when we think about ethical AI, when we think about responsible AI, when we think about responsible technology, it is making sure that the technology is working for the people who are interacting with it, and that you don't have groups of people who are disproportionately negatively affected by or having negative experiences with that technology. And so when we talk about what ethical and responsible technology means, we should be thinking about what accessibility looks like in the widest definition of accessibility, right? Some of the internet standards that people think of, but what languages are used, what modes of communication are there, are different groups represented well, and does the tool function the same for different subgroups of populations as well? So thinking about it that way, we want to be thinking about it in terms of security and privacy. Are these systems designed with privacy in mind and security in mind? What does that mean? What does it mean if you have been using a tool that when it first came out, it had one set of standards and now it's changed? Do you need to change? Is there something you can do? Again, how do you sort of assess that information and look for that? So thinking about what responsible technology is and what ethical and responsible technology is about a whole suite of choices and decisions and trying to maximize as many as possible for you and your organization and your community.
Speaking as a funder and also knowing that there's a handful that do listen to this podcast, how can we, from a funding lens, be more proactive about funding both non-biased and accessible AI? And what does that look like? What are some of the questions that we should be asking as funders when we're funding some of this work?
Absolutely. Great question. So I think the first thing is to ask for what use cases people are thinking about for AI, right? And so saying, what is the potential that is there? The mission-driven space, social impact organizations, whether they're nonprofits or social enterprises, there are a lot of smart people doing a lot of great work around the world who have a lot of ideas, who want to build responsibly, who say we want to use this technology and sort of fit it into making sure that the small farmers, the smallholder farmers that I'm working with, can actually get the information they need about their crops and market prices, or thinking about how do we make sure some of these farmers have access to insurance and their prices are adjusted well and more. So there are a lot of really great ideas. And so I think the first thing that I would say is to ask for what is going on and ask for what people are working on. Because I think a lot of things that have been piloted could be scaled, or a lot of things that have been designed that could be implemented. So I'd say that's the first thing. The second, and sort of related to that, is prioritize, I'd say, new use cases and use cases where people are building new models. That can be new data sets or new ways of sort of constraining these AI tools, because these can then become examples for others, or you find more solutions that you can scale. I think one of the things that is sometimes challenging being in the tech space, this is not new for the age of AI, but is persistent, is that there's this idea that we can have technology versus responsible technology. I like to push back on that and say we need to just highlight and elevate what responsible technology is, because that's all that we should accept. And so ways also that funders can be highlighting the responsible technology cases, I think, is important. And then the third thing that I'd say is continue to support and provide education as to what is responsible technology, and helping people helping educate people on how to make these trade-offs for the realities of their work and their organizations, and recognizing that we can't always let perfect be the enemy of good.
That's it. I mean, I think that you've outlined that really well, and maybe how might we do a better job, both as funders and as creators of technology, finding that balance of the urgency, right? The urgency to create, the urgency to innovate, the urgency to democratize access to technology, and ensuring that it is in fact responsible technology. Where does that balance lie for you?
I would say what's most important is the urgency to serve, right? When we're talking about mission-driven organizations, the urgency that is most important is the urgency to serve your communities, to deliver for the people in the communities, to deliver for your customers, to deliver for your clients, and keep that in mind first. Now, in order to do that, you as a leader, as a funder, should want to bring every tool available to tackle whatever challenge you have in order to serve, in order to deliver. And so technology is probably going to be part of that. AI may or may not be part of that, but using how do we balance making some of these changes? Even how do you balance which technology to use? Do you really need a new Gen AI solution when you have access to a database? Question I ask people often. Do you need a whole Gen AI solution custom created from scratch that will take you 1 year to create and then time to maintain overall, when you actually have a system already in place that uses perhaps some junior talent that then grows into leaders in your organization to serving in other ways? Making some of these trade-offs. When we focus on the urgency to deliver and the urgency to serve, I think it makes some of those other questions a little easier to answer.
I love that, like the urgency to serve being the utmost urgency. I think that that's really well said and super spot on. And how do you, as you are kind of this kind of amazing conduit and translator between kind of where the funding is coming from and where it's going, and ensuring that kind of there's this stream of ethical, responsible technology that sits kind of at the center of that. How do you think about the populations that you serve? And how do you think about, what are some of the questions that you ask yourself and that you encourage others to ask to ensure that service and that act of serving, I can imagine that a lot of the populations that exist there that are the recipients, they're vulnerable already in so many ways. So what are some of those questions that you're asking yourself as you're sort of thinking through, how do I make sure that this technology or this platform or this service is not, as a byproduct, making these populations more vulnerable? Yeah,
absolutely. And I work with organizations that serve a wide range of populations and communities. So I don't think there's any community I don't work with. And so the first question I often ask is, who are you serving, right? And this is true, again, if you're on the nonprofit side, your social enterprise, who are you serving? Who's your community? Who are your customers? What is your intended market? Let's be clear about that. And then asking questions around how they show up in data, asking questions around who benefits from the tool, who can turn it off, who is harmed if things go well, who is harmed if things go wrong. Working through some of those questions are sort of a starting point for me. In the tech that comes next, we actually have a list of, I think, 125 questions for people based on whether they are social impact leaders, whether they're funders, whether they're technologists, whether they're community members, whether they're policymakers, to ask about technology to get at this. A lot of them, those questions continue to be relevant in the age of AI, but certainly for technology broadly. So I point people to that list of 125, and I will not recite all of them for you at this time.
No, I want to emphasize, and we're going to have a link in the show notes to where people can get your book, because I've seen some of those questions, and as a funder, it's really important. It's really important to think about this, this information and technology, especially thinking about it alongside your grantee, right? Because sometimes it can be just such a wonderful conversation, and it doesn't have to be from a dictative point of view from a funder. It's more of, in general, curiosity. How might we serve this population better, right? And I wonder if you can talk to a little bit about some of the positive collaborations that you've had kind of just in this space in general. I know that you've spoken a little bit about some of the grantees or some of the projects that you've worked with. What is it like, and what does it feel like to really have such a positive partnership, especially under the lens of technology? Because sometimes it's hard to find alignment on values when it comes to tech. And I'm just curious, like how that looks and feels to you when that happens.
When it comes to aligning for specific grants, for specific initiatives, for specific funds, I think again it comes back to what are everyone's priorities, right? What are the issue areas you want to make an impact on? What are the outcomes you want to see in that community? Is it that you want to see more jobs? Is it that you want to see higher graduation rates? Is it that you want to see greater access to food or high quality access to high quality childcare? Setting those as the measurable goals, and then again saying, what are all of the tools? It is 2026. Regardless of whether you want to or don't want to, it is very difficult to function without having a data trail and thinking about what it means to care for that data trail and to use information effectively so you can make decisions quickly and you can distribute resources and services efficiently. I tell people often that caring for people in this day and age is caring for their data. It is caring for their technology. You now recognize that technology cannot be considered an extra expense or even an optional expense. It certainly should not be considered overhead. It has to be critical to your program development and to your program execution. You then think maybe differently about how you get consent when you take information from people. And then also where you're storing the information. Are you taking notes on someone's deepest, darkest secrets and just putting it on an unsecured Google form somewhere? There was a case last year. I'm now forgetting the country. So this is awkward. But somewhere in Europe where an organization providing mental health services put their case notes online. It was hacked and then leaked to the world. How do you repair damage? How do you rebuild trust if that's the case? So really recognizing how intimate data is with the populations that you are serving, to whom you are providing services to, really then should be driving a lot of decisions around a lot of other ways that you are operating.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really important caution in how we think about these things. Afua, this has just been like such a fun conversation. I really appreciate you just being so open and sharing so much of your experience with tech and AI and your work. And one of the things that we really like to do on this show is ask our guest if there's any question or thought that they want to leave our listeners with, like as people are listening to this podcast, maybe on the way home from work, something that they can talk about at the dinner table or over coffee with a friend. Is there a question that maybe you want to leave our listeners asking themselves or asking each other?
That is a great question. And also want to say thank you so much for inviting me for this. Really appreciate this podcast and just all of the different lessons from the other folks who've been on this podcast before. I've listened to a few of the episodes and have learned a lot. I think what I might offer to the listeners to think about and maybe to discuss with their friends, their family, and others is, how do you want to change your relationship with technology? I think a lot of the conversations right now about tech, certainly about AI, are framed in this way of it is inevitable, right? There's like this big moving glob that's just going to take over all of us, and there's nothing we can do except succumb to being a cog in the machine. And I would encourage people to think about what they might want to do differently. Do they want to use different tools? Do they want to take some of the tools they have and use them on different things? But how do you want to change your relationship with technology? How can you use technology to truly accelerate the impact you personally want to see in the world?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Afua. This is awesome.
Thank you.